Welcome to the Willard Brown International Business Leadership webinar today. New Systems Thinking for Effective Managers, featuring Dr. Prashun Dutta, an experienced management consultant with over 35 years of varied corporate experience. He was the CIO of Reliance Infrastructure and CIO of Tata Power in India. He is also the author of the newly released book, New Systems Thinking for Effective Managers, The Road Less Traveled. In addition, he has written extensively in an eclectic mix of journals and is a well-known speaker in the CIO circles at Mumbai. Starting his career with National Productivity Council, he went to join Tata Consultancy Services, where he spent close to 10 years in the management consultancy division. He joined Tata Power as the CIO in April 2012 and has since retired in October 2015. He is well known for his contribution to the electric utility sector, where the systems implemented by him at Reliance Infrastructure and Tata Power have been adopted throughout the country. He is now a freelancing consultant to corporates. If you have any questions during the session, please write them down in the Q&A box. Thank you to all of you for joining today. We hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. Dr. Dutta, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shammaa, for the nice introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Kemal for having given me this opportunity to talk to this August body at this very prestigious and worthy institute of yours. And of course, I would like to also thank Dr. Shammaa and Ms. Safa Abdul for coordinating and making this all happen. So today's topic is a presentation on systems thinking. But before embarking on that, I just thought I'd spend a minute on what is it that I'm trying to do. So one is that systems is a different perspective from the one that we have. Now, traditional management is based on certain assumptions, certain beliefs, a particular perspective, which is different from that of systems. And as you know, perspective is very important, because what you see in an object or an event or even a person is actually what your perspective is. If your perspective changes, the object changes, or the event changes, or the person looks different. The change in perspective could bring about exacerbation of problems, or it could remove the problem totally, or it could highlight opportunities. As the well-known French author has said, that the real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes, which is basically you learn many new things simply because you change your perspective. So with that small introduction, let me sort of get on to the main meat of the presentation. I'd like to share the screen, and I hope it is visible to everybody. Okay, so I'll start with an anecdote, or I'll start with a couple of anecdotes, saying that I will take three recent events. About 2 years back, if you may have noticed a meme on the internet, wherein a hapless grandfather was trying to explain to his grandchild how a person having bad soup 6 months ago in a place which was about 10,000 kilometers away from where they were, resulted in there being a paucity of toilet paper in the US. It was obviously difficult to explain to the child about logistics failures and lockdown and stuff like that. But it was, he was at a loss to sort of explain. Another interesting recent event which has happened in India was that before the COVID pandemic became strong or came into being, the current Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, had been trying to popularize digital transactions, mostly digital payments and financial dealings or financial transactions over the net. And though the government was trying very hard, the progress was at best sluggish. It was happening, but then it was very slow. And then came COVID. And with COVID, what happened is, the authorities are very strict about lockdown, so nobody could go out. All payments, etc. It was difficult to get cash also, because often going to the ATM was not very easy, and going to the market was out of question. So the requirement was for digital transactions. Now, what happened was, simultaneously, children who used to go to school earlier were at home all the time. Their parents were working from home. So the father and the mother were both busy working. The children were at a loose end, and they spent loads of time with their grandparents, who had been trying to keep the inventory of groceries and food stuff going at home. So they were compelled to learn how to use the computer for payments, how to use the mobile for digital payments. And they learned. And simultaneously, the companies who were providing services had also to extend their operations to support that digitalization. So as a consequence, the rate of digitalization increased hugely. And today, I understand that that's Indian digital transactions exceeds that of the US, which is amazing, because because US is much more advanced. Then take another example. Working from home has resulted in the Great Resignation. All of you must have heard of this term, Great Resignation, and where many people are quitting their jobs. I believe last month, America, more people quit their jobs than in any month in the last 20 years. Now, what is the reason for this? Work from home gave people ideas. They started enjoying working from home. Some people decided that it was not worth spending all the time in the office. Some people took up freelancing jobs and realized that they can exist or subsist with freelancing jobs, with more than one job, and there was no rigid restrictions of timing, etc. And a third one, which of course is my hypothesis, is that with work from home, the informal organization, which characterizes most companies, had come to an end. And informal organization invariably builds camaraderie and bondage. And with the lowering of the role of the informal organization, the bondage also reduced. So what is common amongst these three? What is common is that there appears to be a lot of interconnection between the factors that rule our lives, that run our lives, and the factors that we as managers and as management functionaries face constantly. We appear to be in a situation wherein there are elements which are scattered all over the globe today, and which are interconnected. And it is not just that they exist, mind you. The elements, they actually influence one another. So the interconnection is resulting in a particular way of behavior, particular pattern in which things move. And what we have really is a web of relations. See, what I mean by that is, suppose there are 10 people in the bus, and all 10 are in their own world, listening to music or reading books or fantasizing or whatever. They are there, they are together, but they are not influencing each other. While suppose there are 10 employees of a department, their work influences it. So we are facing a situation wherein everything or many things are interconnected. They are influencing each other. Now, what are the implications? There are lots of implications, but let me just dwell on 2 or 3. The first is change, because there are a whole host of factors which are spatially scattered, could be even temporally scattered all over. There's total uncertainty, because anything can happen in any one or two of those factors, which will cause a change for me, or in my world. Change is now a constant, as many wise people have been saying. And Rita Gunther McGrath, in her book End of Competitive Advantage, points out that rather than stability being the normal state of things and change being abnormal, it is the other way around. So change is endemic. We have all heard this, but the reason is this: that since there are so many interconnections, we are bound to have change constantly, which means that if you leave your office at 5 o'clock in the evening today, when you go back tomorrow at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever, you don't have the same organization, because what has happened is in between, some guy in the other part of the world, 12 hours away from you, has come up with some discovery which is going to affect your industry, or some idea which is going to make a humongous change in your consumer preference. So, so change is one of the things that we are seeing the manifestation of that, which is an effect of this interconnections. So much so that one could quote Heraclitus, the great Greek philosopher, who said that you can never put your foot in the same river twice, because in between the water has flown. So similarly, you can really never put your fingers on the same organization twice, because by the time some change has happened. And it also brings to forth certain another element which we are all familiar with, which is uncertainty. We just don't know which way the things will move, how things will happen, because since there are so many factors which are well beyond our control, we just don't know which way things will happen, and how through the network of interconnections, how this organization is really going to, or how the entire environment is going to really come up, and how it is going to shape. So, so what we observe is this. These are some of the. The other point is, let's see, because every entity is caught in a web of relations with factors which are external, internal. It justifies its existence by being relevant to that entity, to that group of factors. So let me just explain. Suppose there is a factory in some place, and it has been in existence for, let's say, 10 years, 15 years. Now, obviously, the entire surrounding geography and the surrounding areas have linked up with that. They're very intimately connected with that factory. So if you break it, if you remove it, what will happen is after some time another factory will come, because the justification for that factory exists, which is evident from the interrelations, which the justification which actually emanates from the interrelations, from the environment, from the ambience, that will introduce a new factory. So if you are an organization and if you wish to maintain your relevance, then you have to ensure that you are relevant to the environment. And that is because of these interrelations. If you aren't, then the interrelations will throw you out. And as has been seen, we have seen many organizations which have come and they have not really been absorbed by the location where they are placed. So these are some 2 or 3 very important factors which this interconnections give rise to. And you must also remember that our transport, our international transport, travel, as well as the communications technology is growing by leaps and bounds every day. And so it is actually strengthening and growing such interconnections. So in no way we can function without considering these interconnections. So what is reality like? Reality is characterized by a dense interconnection between various elements of a system. And then I have this quotation of a mountaineer who says, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And it's a very true thing. It will be very difficult to isolate something and study it in isolation. But what is the traditional management practice? Now, first, one point before I get into the management practices, that in the last 300 odd years, science and scientific methods and scientific achievements have been stupendous. We have science has touched every single aspect of our lives for the better. We are leading much better lives than we did a couple of centuries ago. And this has given science a special place in the academia, in the thinking, in the philosophy. It is, what can be referred to as a classic exemplar. It's a model for all academic disciplines. Even humanities subjects like sociology and history, not history, but sociology, talks of itself as a science, social sciences we call it, and management is no exception. Now, management has academics have chosen to adopt a science-based methodology because of the rigor, because of the success of science. Now, what are these practices of science that has impacted management? One of them is a limited problem definition. The problem is always focused on the problem itself, not on the environment. No system, science generally does not recognize the interrelations and the elements which impact the situation. See, for instance, when a scientist carries out an experiment in the laboratory, what is he doing? He's taking the problem situation out of the context and carrying out an experiment to arrive at some sort of result or some sort of conclusion. Quite clearly, the context is immaterial to science. If you add nitric acid to copper sulfate, you will get a greenish blue precipitate of copper nitrate and sulfuric acid anywhere in the world. So context is not important, but in our case, as we have seen, because of the tremendous interconnections, context is very, very, very important. Management, the context is perhaps as important as the problem itself. So this limited problem definition renders it slightly difficult. For instance, if I had to ask someone to evaluate the performance of a plant or of a factory or of a machine, you would immediately go and attack the machine. You would not look at the larger picture and see how the machine is functioning within the context. Then the other thing is, which is related to this limited problem definition, is we take things, we separate things from its context. For instance, in economics, we have a term known as ceteris paribus, which means that everything else remaining the same. But unfortunately, never does everything else remain the same. As soon as we study something, the very study causes a difference in the whole environment. So this reductionist approach is which science adopts is not quite useful in an interconnected world. The third thing is extension of scientific methods. There are several, but I just mentioned two. The first one is, let's see, when science is dealing with anything, it is dealing with the inanimate world, where you have complete predictability, where you know what, you know means you're obviously, even when you're inquiring, you know that this behaves in a particular manner. It is very well understood that you are dealing with something of which you are not a part, A, and B, it is in a predictable manner. Even if there are elements which impact this, those are also predictable. So I can factor them in my model. And I'm dealing with something which is outside of me, and I am outside of the area of study. So when I translate this to management, what I find is managers who issue a diktat, who issue a instruction, who issue a order saying that I want the cost reduced by 10%, and go away. But it very often, more often than not, it actually fails. In fact, it always fails, because because the same thing is not true, because you are a part of that organization. So if you want to change anything, you will have to evolve that change. The change has to be evolved. It cannot be ordained or ordered, because as soon as you say, I want a 10% reduction in my costs, everything has changed. And now the question arises, how will the change, how will you, so the entire action plan for the reduction of costs has to evolve. And that evolution requires everybody's participation. It cannot be isolated. It cannot be just an order. The second point of scientific method which impacts management is known as Occam's razor. I don't know whether you are familiar with it. There is a village in England known as Ockham, from where some gentleman by the name of William had said that we should not multiply entities uselessly. In other words, if I am looking for a solution, or if I am looking for a cause of a particular issue, and we don't have to keep on trying to get, whatever we can see, we can touch, feel, measure, know, that is good enough. We don't have to keep on multiplying entities. And if you think that this is an outdated principle, even in the 1980s, a book written by one of the greatest scientists of all time, Stephen Hawking, has a reference to this William of Occam's razor, when he says we'll not uselessly multiply entities. So these are some of the things of the other point about management practices: universality of results. As I was mentioning, we often in science we are clear that if you don't get the same results for a test, whether you are in California or in Timbuktu, you will not. It is not acceptable. It has to be the same results. We have to get the same results. We have to get consistency. It has to be universally available and acceptable. So while in the case of management practices, it is impossible, because what is true for place A will not be true for place B. And what is true for place B will not be true for place A. So if you try to superimpose some successful practice of place A in place B, you will not succeed. So these are typically the traditional management practices somehow don't seem to support this interconnection. Lastly, reductionism. Reductionism is actually a philosophy of handling, or philosophy for handling complex problems, which was suggested by René Descartes, a French 17th century philosopher. He said, if you have a complex problem, you break it up into its components, come up with a solution for each of the components, and put the solutions together. And that is the solution for a complex problem. Now, if for instance, you have a vehicle and a vehicle has a problem with the horn, with the door, and with, let's say, the indicator lamps, you can put 3 guys on the job, 3 guys work independently, and lo and behold, after some time, everything is working, the car is good to go. But that is not true for a business organization. That is not true for any societal organization, because as soon as you touch something here, because of interconnection, something else gets contacted. So you can't reduce the problem into its simplest form, divide it into 3 parts and do it. You have to necessarily take a view of the whole thing. And that is where traditional management is often unable to handle the problems of real life. And as I was saying that, if you reduce, if there are interconnections and you take one element out of it and try to reduce and try to solve it or try to attack it separately, you will not succeed, because it is connected to other things. So as soon as you try to take it out, as John Muir says, the whole universe connected to the whole universe, it would seem. Now, here's an interesting quote by Marilyn Ferguson, who was a New Age author of the 70s. He says, you cannot understand a cell, a rat, a range structure, a family, a culture, if you isolate it from its context. Relationship is everything. So we see that traditional management is not really very effective. I have put this here not so much to scare anybody, but to sort of show that how, and this is just a sample, it's not exhaustive, but how you can visualize a scene wherein there are connections. I'll come back to this and dwell on it a bit later, but this is a typical influence diagram wherein I have identified the major elements in the universe of this particular company, which is basically electricity distribution company. And I have tried to show how the interrelationships are. And this is only a sample, it's not exhaustive. So now for this, now comes the change in perspective. What is being advocated is a systems approach. Systems approach is, first of all, there is a definition of a system. A system is defined as a collection of interrelated elements that is open to and exchanges matter, energy, and information with the environment. So it is a collection of elements which are interrelated. And that's exactly what we find in reality, that most elements are in the environment are interrelated. So for an entity, this is closer to what we experience. And it is open to matter, energy, and information, as are our organizations. We get information, we get matter, energy, of course, and information all the time coming in and going out of the organization. Now, when you adopt a systems approach, you actually recognize these interconnections. You recognize the fact that these interconnections impact each other, because you already said that they are interrelated and therefore influencing each other. And it gives you it presents a bigger picture, as that earlier diagram which I was showing presented. So it not only, so if you're looking at if you're adopting a systems approach, the first thing you will do for handling a problem is, of course, study the problem only in the context first. You won't go to the problem directly, but you will probably study the problem in the context first. And now this system has several characteristics which are very useful for its management. But I will just not deal with all of them now. But one of them is that it's a unified entity. It's like it is one entity. It is not a collection of elements. See, because elements are interrelated and interconnected, they act in a particular way collectively. It is not that you have 10 people, as I said, in the bus who are not related to each other. It is like working in a department. So all the work of all 10 impact each other. So it is functioning as one unified entity. And in some sense, its reactions to an external entity is sort of consistent with its internal logic. Second point is, with the interconnections only increasing, you can expect systems approach to be very useful because it recognizes the system. But how does life change for us as managers? In this system is defined, in all inquiry, the system is the starting point. That means this integrated whole is actually where you start from. You don't start with the problem itself, but you start with the relevance of that entity in the context in which it is placed. So, for instance, if you were to ask me to evaluate the, how good a, let's say, transport system of a particular city is, I will not immediately go there and find out passenger kilometers and earnings per passenger and stuff like that. I will first of all find out how well is this transport system catering to the needs of the society in which it is embedded. I'll probably find out whether the bus service is really placed where the routes are logical, where you don't have a surfeit of buses where people have lots of vehicles and cars, private cars, and you have does it cater to the railway system? Does it cater to the transport system, if any? So how well is it integrated? And after doing all that, will I go into the details of the organization? And that way, I'll have a more comprehensive understanding of how well it is functioning. Another important aspect of this. Another important aspect of systems approach is there is an internal logic to the system. Now, this is very important, and I just want to spend a bit of time on this. See, when we try to implement something in an organization, we plan everything based on our logic, not so much on the logic of the system. For one, we may not know it. For another, we may not have ever thought of it, because traditional management doesn't tell us that the internal logic of a system is essential or is a determinant of success. So if you don't know the internal logic, you will try to implement it the way you think it should be implemented. But the system will react according to its own internal logic, which may be at variance to that of yours, and which is usually the case. That's why, as Margaret Wheatley, the well-known American consultant and academician, says that about 75 to 80% of all major projects actually don't achieve the goal that it is supposed to achieve, simply because because there is no harmony with the internal logic. So it is something which has to be sort of remembered, that because it is not merely a collection of elements, but one whole, and is dynamic by nature, it has an internal logic of its own. So as soon as you put in the first step of a large initiative, the chances are that the organization has changed, the system has changed, and it will now react in a different manner from what it was when you started the setup. And there's one more point I just want to mention, two more points I want to mention. One is that there is, when I say systems approach, I also mean in any process, studying the entire end-to-end process. That means, suppose you want to implement major IT project, and if you don't factor in the implementation factors in the design, at the design stage, you will not succeed. If you don't have a proper system of change management, of learning and development, you will not succeed. So, whenever any major activity is there, systems approach demands that you consider the full end-to-end process and see what needs to be done at every stage for other stages. The last point is about big picture. See, often we are told, management gurus tell us that you must look at the big picture. Has anyone told you what is the big picture? Is it the larger canvas, or is it big because it's large? Actually, the big picture, let me just explain it through a small apocryphal anecdote, which is that Christopher Marlowe was the mayor of London. The city was rebuilt after the Great Fire in 1666. So it seems Christopher Marlowe one day came to some work site, and he saw three people doing identical work, laying bricks basically. So he went and asked the first guy, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Governor, can't you see I'm laying bricks?" He goes to a second guy and says, "What are you doing?" So he says, "No, sir, I'm actually building a wall." But he goes to a third guy and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "But remember, all three are doing the same thing." He says, "I am building a cathedral." Now that is the big picture. Why is the big picture? Not because it is big, but because it is a picture, because it's complete. So a system is precisely that. It is a big picture. It is the big picture which we have been often exhorted to adopt, or often exhorted to see. So what comes that? So because they have the internal logic, the results are often counterintuitive and difficult to predict. From Krishnamurti, who says that action has meaning only in relationship, and without understanding relationship, action of any level will only breed conflict. So roughly, systems approach is this, and looking at the big picture, considering the context. These are some of the major characteristics. There are, of course, many more, and I shall now hand over to Dr. Shammaa for question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dutta, for this very informative and insightful presentation. Little did I know about what is systems thinking and the systems approach. And I have to say that I learned a lot from this talk that you just gave right now. Okay, let me maybe start, with a question, and then we're just reminding you, if anyone has a question, to please write down your question in the Q&A box, in front of you. So, Professor Dutta, you have mentioned that systems possess certain characteristics that may be used for its management. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes, actually, the first, everything derives from the nature and the construct of a system. Now, since we have these innumerable linkages between elements, and information flows across one or more routes constantly. If something is happening in some place, it will definitely be available, that information will be available within the system to many other nodes, many other elements, many other entities. So, there's constant feedback. And if you who are charged with the responsibility of managing an organization, which is also a system, if you have proper sensory measures, and if you have sensors, and if you have people who understand what is important and not important, the feedback is constantly available to you. You can manage, you can organize, you can lead the organization to higher and higher levels of performance, because you are constantly getting feedback, both positive and negative. That means negative feedback is that which gets you moves you away from any deviations, while positive is something which accentuates deviation. So, it is this feedback which actually stabilizes you, which actually provides a way of ensuring that you are in a stable equilibrium situation. The second one, which is of course related to this, is homeostasis. Homeostasis basically means the same thing, that that which keeps you in equilibrium all the time. And in a business organization, see, the nature of system is such that feedback and homeostasis go hand in hand. Even if you don't want it, it is still there. But if you are a good manager, if you are a manager who is aware of this and who has a systems background, he or she would naturally take advantage of this and would have an excellent sensory organizational limb to pick up these sensors and to rectify operations so as to move towards. So this is this is available to you as a manager, you should be able to utilize it. Another very interesting, and I think the most interesting trait of system is equifinality. See, equifinality really means that since there are so many paths, there are several paths through which you can go from one origin to one destination. If you start off and say, I want to put up a ERP, I want to put up a ERP in my company, or I want to establish some new line of business, or I want to, it could be even, I want to improve safety. So, if you don't mind, I'll just go back to that diagram, because that will tell us that just this diagram will tell us some more. Anyway, see, if you look at this diagram, you'll see that, for instance, if you say that operations and maintenance costs, there are so many paths which actually leads to O&M cost, which impact the O&M cost. In other words, getting to achieve O&M cost reduction is going to be difficult. So equifinality actually says that there are several paths to any origin and destination journey, and you could adopt any path. So suppose you are putting up a major project, or suppose you are putting up a new business, you could take it, you could say, I want this done by 15 days. That is one way of looking at it. The other could be that, look, anything that I do in the organization, I also want to enhance the organization's capability. I want to enhance the learning. L&D, as you know, is a very fundamental aspect. Even in the balanced scorecard, it is one of the foundational parameters. So I want to, anything that I do, I want to enhance capability. So if I put in an ERP, or if I'm putting in a new project, I have some people who are there to learn, some people who will carry the learning into the organization for many days. I think HR, or human resources department, this could be a very major achievement, because HR is targeted with the task of enhancing capability of the organization. If you enhance capability of the organization, you are actually ready for tomorrow when the complexities increase, and you can handle competition much better. So typically you can, so equifinality gives us that scope. And in fact, I personally feel that equifinality is the final test of a manager. You adopt that path which actually is the best for the organization. Just merely finishing the task quickly is, of course, an objective. I'm not saying that you will waste time, and because once you made the investment, you want obviously the returns. But if at the same time, if you can enhance capability, if you can enhance understanding of the scenario, you are so much better equipped for tomorrow. So equifinality actually gives you that chance. It also, there is another aspect to it. Sometimes you will have implemented a project, completed it, but still results are not forthcoming. So you may be able to do something post the project to ensure that the results come. So that is also a part of equifinality, which seems impossible, because how can I do after the project is done? But I have seen that, by taking certain corrective measures, you can actually rectify errors which have happened in the past. For instance, if you did not do enough of change management during the project, but after the project is over, you push on the change management, and maybe it is less efficient, but it accomplishes the task. See, the equifinality, the importance is, and the last point I'll make on this, is that it is focusing on the process while doing the work. See, by and large, when you start a project in any company, anywhere in the world, the bosses will say, how quickly, when will you finish? But that is not the only target. I mean, finishing is of course a target, but how much of value addition is happening in the process? We think that the process is useless. I mean, that's why we say, complete it fast, complete it quickly. Can you squeeze it? Can you reduce it by 2 months or 3 months or whatever? Because we think that this process is useless. but the process is not useless. And the systems thinker will tell you that because he knows that that is when you can add value. When does the change happen? When the project is going on, not afterwards or before. So this is the concept. So these are three of the important characteristics of systems.
Thank you very much for this elaboration, Dr. Dutta. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I would like to touch upon them. Maybe we can address some of these questions as briefly as we can. So here is a question. Do you think WFH, and I'm not sure what this stands for, to be honest. Do you think
work from home? Work from home.
Work from home. Do you think work from home would open opportunities for the Arab countries, Egypt, for example, in Europe and USA, to join companies there and work virtually or remotely as no work visa restrictions anymore? Or these companies will still seek or prefer local employment as they have more knowledge of the local market?
Yeah, I think the answer is in the question itself. See, there are some things, some items of work which do not require local knowledge. For instance, if you're going to go to, let's say, Europe, you're going to go to, let's say, Michigan, and you don't know the rules that apply in Michigan, you can't be expected to do something which are impacted by the rules. But if you are doing some work which is agnostic to the rules, which are, for instance, they ask you to write a program, they give you very clear specs, they give you very clear specs, and they tell you to write a program. It might be possible. If you are also familiar with the architecture and you know how that will fit into the larger, as a systems thinker, I can't think of anything without thinking of the larger picture. So, how that will fit into the larger IT scenario, it should be possible. So, and believe me, because you will have an advantage of cost, that means you will be able to do it at lower costs than their local people would be. You will get an advantage. You will be able to do it. So that's my answer. That those things which can be done will be done.
Thank you very much. We have another question here. Do you have any specific examples of how systems thinking lead to a true solution during your time leading businesses?
Yes, I have, but I'm a bit chatty about the time.
Yeah, sorry. Do you have any specific examples of how systems thinking lead to a true solution during your time leading businesses? If you have any specific example that you can share, they want something, specific about how systems thinking really solved a problem or resulted in something significant or something like this. I think that is the question.
Okay, here goes. Let me just try to put it as briefly as possible. Yes, I think I can quite a few of such instances I could give you. But one, when I first took over as CIO of Reliance Energy, which is an energy distribution company, there was hardly any IT in the company. And from there, we built a full integrated IT, which is now the norm in this country. Now, that is one part which it comes from system thinking simply because, I was very clear that it has to be totally integrated. See, for instance, what is the job in an energy distribution company? There is generation, there's transmission, and there's distribution. So distribution has tons and tons of customers. They have a totally spread out geography which they have to address as the transmission, as the transmission, but generation is equipment. So to integrate all of this, we needed appropriate software. Now, what I was able to do is have a totally integrated IT software, which included geographical information systems. Every engineer worked in the field and on GIS. They didn't work on anything else. They did not need to work on the ERP. They did not need to work on anything else apart from mail, of course, and the GIS. In fact, I had said that GIS is not geographical information system, it is your workspace. And believe me, even today, all the work on the field is completely well reflected in the geographical information systems. Your question will be, how is it systems thinking? It is systems thinking only because at a time when there was no example, I was able to think holistically about the IT needs of the organization as well as the environment. And now eventually it has become the norm throughout the country, in India that is. So this is one example of, So what I had done is I had right up front, when I was first introduced to the company in 2003, I studied the organization and I studied the elements, and I realized that this has a major spatial component in it. This has, of course, the standard ERP, and this has a very large billing. So these are three major aspects of the organization, and I put in three major software, ready-made software for these three, and I integrated it through APIs, through a variety of other means. And so the entire organization works as one entity. It is not a collection of entities. It is one full entity. If something happens in place A, place B is informed about it. So this is one. Then secondly, equifinality, which I told you I'm very fond of. When we implemented, I will mention the ERP, though I was not wanting to. When we implemented the ERP in Reliance Energy, I insisted that we had a business partner. We had a partner to implement it, who were actually experts, who had implemented all over the world. And I insisted, in fact, I put in a special clause saying that you will do what we refer to as TOTK, transfer of technology and knowledge, for which I am willing to give you additional resources, for which I am willing to pay you also separately. But I want you to conduct classes to ensure that everybody in the team actually learns and learns it well. This was in 2004. By 2008, we had become IT consultants for power companies in the country. Believe me, we did 3 assignments, one after the other, wherein we were consultants to other IT and energy distribution companies in the country, and which was, of course, source of revenue, only because I was able to capture that capability in-house. And we had a fairly large team, and we were no longer a cost center, you see. Because of that, because we were earning revenue, we were not a cost center. So this was another example of systems thinking, which actually, through equifinality, we were able to achieve this. And even today, it is considered to be a very good achievement, because no other power company in the country or even in the world actually has this. I could give you a few more examples, but I think these two should suffice for a start.
I think this is good enough. I think this really gives us some good idea about how really systems thinking can lead to solutions. So thank you for sharing those actual examples that happened. Okay, we have another question. We have still a couple of questions, so we'll try to cover, hopefully as much, if not all of the questions. How can people get to understand the internal logic of a system so that they can successfully implement a solution?
Yeah, let me answer this question. Actually, you can't. The answer is you can't. I mean, the internal logic, because you see, it is not a consistent internal logic. The internal logic itself changes. As soon as you do something to the system changes, and therefore the internal logic changes. So it is very difficult. It is in fact, there is a comment by Jack Welch, which I mentioned in my book, but I've forgotten. It says roughly that more than predicting, it is reacting that's important. Because what you have to do is, you have to have those sensory sensors. I was talking about sensors in feedback control. So you have to have those sensors which will immediately highlight any change which could lead to further changes. So it is not a question of sitting somewhere and predicting, this is how the thing will move. It is in participating in it. In fact, I wanted to call my book Dancing with the Elephant rather than what the publishers have, because it is like, you have an elephant-like thing in your organization. You have to dance with it. You can't whip it to dance. You can't say you dance. You'll have to understand its logic. You'll have to understand its steps. You'll have to understand the music it wants, and you have to dance with it to achieve whatever you have to achieve. So the answer to your question is that it's a very, very good question. In fact, excellent question so far. And the other point which I want to mention is, see, in any element, an element can take a variety of stages. It can be, like a switch can be only in 2 stages, on and off. But a human being can be in a million stages. So it is continuous. It's practically infinite. It is impossible to a priori understand what is the internal logic. But if you are on the, if you're alert, if you are on your toes, you will get to understand as soon as any changes happen, and you will get to understand what logic is operating today morning, not more than that, or this week. So that's the answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Another question, Dr. Dutta, if having constant feedback and system touch points that can indicate that the operation is stable, if you then have automated digital systems, does this remove the need for documented management systems like procedures, etc.? Shall I repeat this question?
No, I've understood. Actually, the question is that can the digital systems or computer systems replace procedures? See, if you can bring it down to a level wherein it is completely repetitive, then it perhaps can. But where there is an element of discretion involved, you can't. For instance, you have a feedback system which tells you that XYZ thing is happening. Pressure is increasing in so and so place. Now, the system for instance, one of the things we used to do is if it goes outside the range, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have transformers. Now, in transformers, we put in certain sensory elements which would measure the temperature of certain part of the computer of the transformer. So if it gets very hot, they used to send a signal. Now, occasionally the signal would not come, or the engineer may not understand the seriousness or whatever, and the transformer would burst. So after it happened once, and transformer is pretty expensive, particularly large ones. So then we decided that we'll switch it off. If it goes beyond some level, we'll switch it off. So now this, we can call it, self-learning system or, but fact is that switching it off is not a solution. It is just avoiding the problem. So somebody has to go and look at it. But the switching off can be automated. For instance, in computers, standard problem is, what we used to in my younger days refer to the 3-finger salute, Control Alt Del. You have a hanging, the computer is hanging for whatever reason. You don't really know. So what you do is you switch it off and put it on, and it starts working. So that is an option which is often built into many programs. I've seen programmers putting that in beyond some level. If it hangs, you just switch it on. If it doesn't work, even then you raise a hue and cry. So some level of automation is possible, but completely depending on it, at least as of now, with the level of artificial intelligence that is there, I don't think we can do it.
Thank you very much. We have another question: how to use new ideas in management in world inflation problems?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood the question. How to use?
Are there any ideas? I think this is really what the question is trying to say. Are there any ideas in management to address world inflation problems?
World inflation problems, you see, inflation is for a variety of reasons. And if you want to address the world inflation problems, it's really a tall order. But inflation, there are various reasons, and if you are affected by inflation, you have to see, what you can do, and you have to look at the long-term and the short-term aspects. Now, if you say that prices of raw material is going up, then can we start improving on productivity? Can we start using less raw material? Can we curtail wastage? Can we curtail reworks? If it is, and then can we increase the price, of our final goods? I'm not sure I understand the question too well, but if you're talking about world inflation, something or the other is always inflating. And that is because there's either excess money in the system, or goods and services are not, or inadequate, demand is more than it. And also a slight level of inflation is always desirable, because you are then motivating people to invest and to get into the sector. So I think there are several factors in this, and I am not sure that I have an answer to this world inflation problem, honestly.
Thank you very much. We have, I think, here a comment: excellent talk. Could not agree more with the importance of incorporating system thinking in management. Systems thinking is already an essential tool in engineering of modern complex technologies and systems, which may be described as VUCA, V-U-C-A. New energy systems is a great example. Systems thinking allows us to see the dynamic, interconnected, interdependent, and constantly changing set of relationships that make up the complex whole of the global energy system. So that was just a comment here. We have also a comment asking if Prashun can suggest some recommended readings, including the link to his recent book.
Yes, I can. Can I just make one sentence about that earlier statement that was made about the systems? See, very, very true. I'm very glad that you are liking it. My only point is, that systems engineering, which is basically the systems approach to engineering problems, is different from systems approach to organizational problems. And I'll tell you why. See, in engineering problems, you might have, if you are talking of, let's say, a large refinery, you are talking of a million components, and it's very complex, but it is predictable. You know how it will react. You know how it will act. In the case of, I was giving the example the other day that, if you go and, you can go and hit a wall, what will happen? By Newton's law, you will get a reaction, right? Third law tells you that action and reactions, you will get a pain. But if I go and hit another person, you don't know how he's going to react. He could run away. He could hit back. He could curse you. He could take out a gun and shoot you. The whole host of options are there. So what happens with systems engineering is, since it is predictable, there are many, many tools and techniques through which you can actually attack a systems design issue. For instance, any large implementation, honestly, it is quite complex. So the technical part of it can be done. Architecture, how will it mesh in? How will this additional stuff mesh into the total architecture? Who is going to manage where? The whole host of factors which we handle whenever we have a large. But those are predictable. When you come to systems relating to societal systems, for instance, a business organization or even education institution, it becomes difficult to predict. There, the internal logic is different. In the case of an engineering situation, internal logic is known. So I just wanted to make this fine point. I will pass on the details of my book, and there are several other books which I can also send. You see, one of the biggest problems is this field of systems. There are academics who are very erudite and very learned people. Now, much of the writing that they do is so esoteric that managers find it difficult to use. And there is no books for managers, and yet it is most important for them. So my book, actually, my book is more of an expression of my, helplessness at this hiatus between academia and the management. And I have written it to fulfill that. But I know there are some books which you could find interesting, and I will mention those. I will send them to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have, I guess, like a minute or so, but I would like to. I'm just reflecting on myself, and I personally feel that I am integrating a lot of what you're saying about systems thinking. When I ask my students first question before I start any topic in consumer behavior, tell me anything going on around. What is going around in terms of everything, not just marketing or economics, but everything going on around. So, showing this relation, I think, is part of the system thinking approach. And I remember very well, my manager told me this when I started to work at Orange. I was working in corporate reporting and budgeting. So we were seeing the big picture. We were seeing everything going on across the entire company. We collected information from all different departments. And she told me that once you work at the corporate level, you will never, ever want to work at the functional or at the department level, because you are seeing the big picture. You're seeing everything, and you will never want to work on these small details that happen here or happen there. So I think this is a confirmation for you and what you are saying. Yeah. Last thing before we conclude, I remember taking a workshop on design thinking. Is design thinking, has some relation to systems thinking, or they are two separate things?
No, it has a relation. Actually, I have also conducted as well as attended design thinking workshops. But design thinking, I think, see, in design thinking, you are expanding the whole thing to, I think, three aspects. The customer, the design, and something which is very good, which is much better than what we have now, and it is probably in the right direction. But it is not total system thinking. Also, you are also involving people. You have a method of collecting their feedback, collecting their ideas. So that is useful. But I have used some other techniques for collecting or for tapping into the brains of members, which I find is better. I mean, honestly, I will not sort of say that design thinking is not good. In fact, I have a very close friend whose living is only based on design thinking. But I have told him also that I think some of the techniques that I have used, like nominal group technique and all that, are better in tapping into the brains of. But yeah, design thinking is definitely more systemic than the usual restricted way of design.
Okay, with that, I would really like to conclude today's webinar by thanking Professor Dutta for such an inspiring and I have to say mind-opening talk. I personally learned a lot. I would like to thank all of you for attending today and thank you for sharing those questions. I wish you all the best and keep in good health. Goodbye.
Goodbye. I will communicate with you, Professor Doctor, later.